Brilliance Audio presents A Girl Divided by Lindseth, performed by Emily Wu Zeller. The damp, cedar-tinged air of the Chinese mountains lingered on Genie's tongue, spicy and familiar, as she turned her face to catch the mist falling from the gray January sky. She closed her eyes in pleasure, the tiny droplets cooling her flushed skin as she waited on the steep footpath. A deep magical hush blanketed the valley this morning, one interrupted only by the faint shushing of the river far below and the occasional bird twitter. Except for the crunch of footsteps behind her, she might be all alone, an adventurer exploring an unknown mystical world, far, far from the modern 20th century, with all its revolutions and wars. Her father would be horrified if he knew Genie secretly hoped that the enchanted creatures from Zhenju's stories were real, that if she ventured far enough she would find them, talking monkeys and tigers, virtuous princesses and evil demons, between the jagged limestone peaks, still waging their elemental battles of good versus evil. The footsteps stopped beside her.
"It's not fair,"
a musical feminine voice said in Chinese between gasps.
"You spend as much time inside as I do, and yet you aren't even breathing hard."
Genie laughed as she opened her eyes. Li Ming was glaring at her, her delicate, heart-shaped face flushed from exertion. If her best friend weren't so averse to hugs, Genie would have given her one. "It's because I'm so much taller than you," Genie answered in the same language. "But don't despair. What trait makes for a more valuable wife? Long legs, or the ability to weave the most beautiful patterns in China?" Her friend flushed more deeply, this time with pleasure.
"Perhaps not all of China."
"That's not what my father says. Wherever he goes, he says your fabric is the first to sell, for which he is most thankful, since it helps pay his expenses."
"As it should, since he's a man of the cloth,"
her friend said dryly, but her dark eyes twinkled. Genie joined in her friend's amusement, then looked out over the valley and sighed in deep appreciation. "Sometimes I wonder that he ever leaves here at all. It's so beautiful."
"It looks rather ordinary to me,"
Li Ming said doubtfully, her breathing almost back to normal. "Oh, not at all!" Genie ran her gaze down the steep terraced hillsides as they cascaded like irregular stair-steps to the valley floor. They were golden brown now, fallow with the season like the narrow patchwork of fields flanking the river that divided the valley. But come summer, the landscape would become a deep verdant green, like the most precious of gems. With practiced ease, she found her tiny house on the edge of the village and smiled. Home. Smoke from Zhenju's cooking fire lazily wended its way from the small hut behind the dark timbered house. Reinforced with river stone, the construction was the same as every other building, the methods unchanged from the century before. She hadn't been sure, when her father had decided to move to this valley 10 years ago, whether she would ever adjust to this raw, primitive land. Having been raised in cities like Beijing and Hankou, she had found the silence that came with the endless open air, and the utter lack of commotion, with no carts or cars or ceaseless crowds, terrifying and strange. Now this forgotten corner of Guizhou province in southwestern China was as close to heaven as she could imagine. Li Ming touched Genie's sleeve. "We should keep going." Steeling herself for another steep climb, Genie tightened her grip on the soup pot she was carrying and started up the narrow path once more. Soon her own gasps for breath filled her ears, so loud she almost didn't hear the faint rumble of far-off thunder. Except it wasn't the season for storms, and the sound didn't fade. Instead, it grew louder and more distinct. Genie's heart stuttered as she froze, her gaze flying to the sky, the covered dish in her hands forgotten. Li Ming likewise stiffened. "What is it?" her friend whispered, her dark eyes darting around the clearing. The otherworldly growl seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. "An airplane, I think." Frantically, Genie searched the low clouds for movement. There was no mistaking the sound now, though she had heard it only once before, back in Hankou, before her father had moved them there.